watching this video, you're most likely very familiar with the Drifthook Fly Fishing System. You feel confident with your fly boxes and your seasonal hatch chart, and you want to be able to even more closely match what's going on in the water that you're fly fishing. If this sounds like you, then I think you're ready for the next level. Now, if you're not familiar with the Drifthook Fly Fishing System, head on back to the intermediate lesson number 2. This is where we talk about the system and all the details that are in it. Those will give you the basics before you dive into this lesson. Now, you can be successful using just the seasonal hatch chart with your fly boxes as you can with the system I'm about to show you. But if you're ready to be as precise as possible, then this is the way to go. We're going to be using a Bug Seine to gather samples from the water that we're fly fishing. But before we dive into how to use a Bug Seine to sample the water, let's recap our major orders of insects and their stages. This way you can be more familiar with what you're sifting through when you find these new aquatic insects. For this lesson, we're going to be discussing the Nymph and Emerger stages, as these will be the specimens that we'll be gathering with your seine. The 6 orders of flies in our program can be simplified into these groups: the Midge, the Mayfly, the Caddis, the Stonefly, worms and annelids, and eggs. The following slides will show illustrations of each stage of these orders and will help you recognize them easily on the water. The first is the Midge in the Nymph stage. Now, this typically has a worm-like movements, they're very small, it has no noticeable front set of legs, and it's most likely going to be the smallest insect when you check your seine. The next is going to be the Midge Emerger. Now, this almost looks identical to the Midge Nymph, but the one thing you're going to notice is that there's going to be a small bubble or a husk on its underside. Now, these are its wings of the Midge, and it's adding that little bit of oxygen to help it bring itself to the surface as it comes to emerge. The next is the Mayfly Nymph. Now, the easiest way to recognize this insect is to look for 3 tails. This is also a good way of picking out your flies if you didn't know what they're called, or if you didn't buy our box and you got it from a friend. Just look for the patterns that have 3 distinct tails. Now, some fly patterns only have 2 tails, but they're still trying to mimic the Mayfly. Look for single-pronged feet. Compared to the Midge and the Mayfly, these are going to be honestly noticeable. The next is going to be the Mayfly Emerger. Now, the Mayfly Emerger is going to have prolonged wings and a husk on their lower half. This is also part of the emerging stage as they're coming to the surface, so look for those 2 things as you're digging through your seine. Next, we have the Caddis Nymph. Now, look for caddis casings. When you're on a river that is clean enough to have caddis, you're most likely going to find clusters of these under rocks and in your seine. Caddis casing looks, it's like a very small Frito Cheeto, and this is a casing that they build around themselves in their nymph stage as they're preparing to become an emerger. The next stage is going to be the Caddis Emerger. Now, these are going to be a lot harder to find because it's a very messy presentation from nymph to getting to the surface. They're getting out of that chuck, and they are immediately going at a fast pace to the surface. It's very rare that you're going to get a chance to see an emerging caddis, but when you do, it's pretty cool. The next thing you want to look for is if trout are rising and you're only seeing the backs or you're seeing the tails, they're most likely devouring these Caddis Emergers because they're getting them right before they get to the surface. So that's a good indication when you're out on the water if you're seeing those backs and seeing those tails. The next is the Stonefly Nymph. We're not going to go into the annelids and the eggs because I think most people know what a worm looks like and most people know what an egg looks like. So we're going to finish today's lesson, or at least this portion of it, with the Stonefly Nymph. So the Stonefly Nymph is typically larger than the Mayflies. This only has 2 tails versus Mayfly that has 3, and the feet have 2 toes. That's the one thing to look for on their feet is they have 2 toes. That's an easy way to decipher between if it's a Stonefly or if it's a Mayfly. You'll notice in our fly boxes that we have patterns that mimic both, and that's the reason why. They're very similar in shape. This is a very effective way of fishing both patterns. So that was a very quick overview of what to look for when you're out in the water. Remember, these slides are available on the download sections of the members portal. Just check those out right there if you want to put them on your phone or if you want to print them out before you head out to the water. Next, we're going to dive in what a Bug Seine is and how to use it. So a Bug Seine, in all reality, all it is a mesh fabric that you can use to gather live specimens from the water, just to determine what type of fly you want to use when you're fly fishing. Now, one of the easiest ways to make a Bug Seine is to buy a 5-gallon paint strainer from your local hardware store, and then wrap it around your fly fishing net. Now that we have the seine attached to our net, we will take 4 samples. Yes, 4. The reason we're doing this is we want to receive a more accurate collection and determine our aquatic insect life in the body water of what we're fly fishing. The best place to use your seine is going to be in faster water in a current or in a current seam. The floating organisms will collect along these current seams, and these are the areas also where trout reside. So as they are the areas where food is readily available, it's going to be a place that we're going to want to take our samples from because we know the fish are eating them. So step 1. We're going to place the seine in the current and count to 20. All right. Now we're going to lift the seine out of the water and we're going to inspect what we caught. Step 2. We're going to place our net and our seine downstream and we're going to slowly start walking towards it. Now during this capture, try not to kick up items from the bottom. This is going to show us what type of emerger patterns are currently in the water. Now just take a few steps and then let's take a look at what we've captured. Step 3, or sample 3. So this time we're gonna purposely kick up the bottom of the river. Now, make sure you're allowed to do this in your waters and where you're fishing, because in some places it is illegal to kick up the bottom of the river. A good place that I've always liked to fish is the San Juan River, and you're not allowed to do this. It's actually called the San Juan Shuffle, and it's been outlawed. So if we are in a place that we can do this, we're gonna continue like we just did with step 2, but we're gonna actually try to move some of that rock, some of that water, some of that vegetation. And hopefully by doing this, it's going to give us a broader view of all the insects that are currently clinging onto those rocks or residing in the water around it. Step 4 and the last sample that we're going to pick. This one's actually easy. We're not going to be using our Bug Seine. We're just going to pick up a rock and check it out, see what's on it. Now, make sure to turn the rock over because the majority of your nymphs are going to be residing on the bottom side of that stone. So now that you've done a thorough evaluation of the specimens in the water, let's take a look at our fly box and find the pattern that best matches them. So from what we have pulled, I can tell that the majority of the insect life in this particular stretch of water during this time of year is going to be midges, mayflies, caddis, and as you can see here, we also found an annelid or a worm. And I've put these into a separate container just so it makes it easier for everybody to see. And I'm going to compare them to my fly box to see what pattern I'm going to want to use best. So out of this, I'm using the Drifthook Pro Nymph fly box. I'm going to choose a few different patterns that I feel would replicate the ones that I've found. Now I'm not going to get too detailed when I'm picking these out. I'm just trying to find a fly that's going to match the shape and the size of the specimens that I've picked up. I'm also trying to pick a little bit of the same color, but I'm not going to get too crazy about that because the fly itself is going to change color when it gets wet. I would typically start with 2 to 3 choices to make my decision. So now that I have them together, I'm going to add a little bit of water to the mix to see what my fly mimics and find the closest one to the samples that I've picked. So I'm going to start with this fly. Now I continue this with my second most found insect, and I use that with my second fly, my 2-fly rig setup. Now if you check out your seasonal chart, you're going to notice that these specimens that we found for this time of the year are consistent with the table. So have fun trying to match the hatch, and get out there and catch a big one.